Hey everyone. It is 2 o'clock. We'll give everyone a little bit longer to log in, but while we wait, I can answer some of the questions that were submitted during registration. So the first question was that they would like to connect Grist to make integrations, and you can do that. Make was formerly Integromat, and they do have a Grist integration, and we will link the integration page in the chat. So be sure to check that out. And then the next question was how to keep a history of who did what on the team. And so there's two different ways to do that. So I created just an example here of the first way, which is using trigger formulas. So here I can make a change, basically add a record or update a record. And when I do, it records my name under last updated by, and then it records the time at which I made the update. I threw on this last one here, so if you didn't want the time, you just wanted the date, you could do that as well. So the way to do this, to get the name, you do need to use trigger formulas, which it's like a formula, but triggers upon a specific action. So for this, for all three, I set it to apply on changes to any field for this record. So anytime a field is updated, the last updated by name will record the name of the user who's logged in, and that is controlled in your profile settings. So mine's just set to Natalie, so that's what it shows. The formula to pull the name is user.name. Now this formula only works with a trigger formula, and again, pulls the name from the user logged in. For last updated at, that contains the date and time component. You'll actually use a trigger formula again, but this time the formula would just be in all caps now with an opening and closing parentheses. Let me zoom in. So you can see that better. Again, set to change on any change to any field. So it would then record the date and the time. And so that column type is date time. Now this last one I threw on, in case you didn't want that time component and you just wanted to know what date, you would use the formula today. So with the now, it contains both of those components, date and time. And then for date, it's just today. That's the difference between now and today. And for this one, I just did a date column because that's all it contains. Oh, and I didn't set that to trigger. So let me show that again. So I just have that set as a formula. We don't want that. We want it to trigger on a change to a field. You just click convert to trigger formula. It defaults to apply to new records. We want to change it to changes to a specific field. And for this case, any field for this record. And so when let's say we'll use this one. If you look at this time, it says 2 o'clock. And if I change the value, it's now going to record this time. Now, since the date didn't change, we don't see that, but we do see that that time component did change. And then another way to see a history of who did what from your team on a document is actually in the document history. And we'll look at this again in the actual portion of the webinar. But to get to document history, click the link down here under Tools. And under this Activity tab, it'll list the email of the user and when they made the change, and then it'll show what the change was. Now, right now, it's just showing the changes to this table. If I had other tables in this document, I could click all tables and I would see all that information. Keep in mind, for Activity, it only stores the last 100 changes, so recent changes only. But that would be how you could see exactly who made that change and when. And then if you just wanted to record it on the record, you could do this method as well. So the next question was how we compared with other similar tools. And there's going to be a couple links for this one because we do have an article that compares Grist and Airtable. We have a a community post where Dimitri goes into the differences between Grist and base row. The key differences between Grist and these other tools are that we have a drag and drop custom layout with dynamic linking, those features, which we'll see a little bit in our template that we're using today as that dynamic linking. But you can create some great dashboards with these custom layouts. And then access rules, which we'll touch briefly on today. And then Python formulas that we use. So as I close that out here, this is a Python formula. So you can do a lot with it, and there's great formula support for Python. Now, another difference just between us and Airtable is the data ownership. So we are open source, and you can export your Grist doc as a SQLite file. Airtable forces exports as a CSV, which breaks the relational structure. And then the last question was about connecting multiple sets of data for analysis. I would recommend checking out the account-based sales team template. Here we have companies, contacts, and deals, and they're all connected by references. And so it's a good example of what you can do with references. And here it's 3 sets of data. Now, I understand everyone's use case can be very different. So if yours is a lot different from this, feel free to post in the community with some sample data, and we can help you with your specific use case. And we'll link the community forum already for you. Okay, we'll go ahead and jump in. So hello, everyone. Anais, was I muted that? No, I wasn't. Did I accidentally mute myself? Here we go. Okay. So welcome to the November webinar. Today's the second webinar of the Grist for Teams series. So it'll be a 4-part series. Today's part 2. All of our previous webinars can be found on our YouTube channel, including part 1 of the Grist for Teams series. And then a recording of this webinar will be added there too, so you can go back and reference it as needed. So today's webinar is all about document sharing and collaboration. We will walk through granting document access and collaboration tools like our work on a copy feature, and then I'll tell you some hot tips along the way. Before we jump into our document sharing and collaboration tools, we'll review how documents and workspaces can inherit access, which we did cover in our last webinar, but it's important to note. So first, we have our site level access, so the team level access. To access that, click this Manage Team button from your team homepage. And we see our team members here. So you can add team members. You just type in their email address up here, and then you would be able to add them as owner, editor, viewer, or no default access. So from last month, we learned that the difference between editor and owner is that owners can see and change sharing, and then they can also modify access rules. So while the differences by default are minimal, editors can be further restricted within documents using these access rules. And we will touch on that later in the webinar. But by default, editors are almost as powerful as owners. Now, viewer has the ability to view documents, but cannot make any edits. And then we have this no default access. So by default, workspaces inherit access from teams. So this is our teams view, and we'll look at workspaces in a second. And then the documents inherit from the workspace. So users would have the same access level to individual documents as we set here at the team level. But you can change this access at both the workspace level and the document levels should a particular workspace or document require different permissions. So with no default access, like we see here, these team members would not be granted access automatically to any workspaces or documents these users would need to be added to those specific workspaces and documents that they need to be in. So again, we can change this at the document and workspace level, which we'll look at now. So we'll use human resources, that workspace, for our example, since that's the document where the document we're using today lives. And to manage a workspace, click the three dots and click Manage Users. And so right now, we see all the same access that was assigned at the team level. And that's because this little bit here, Inherit Access, is set to in full. So it's fully inheriting those permissions at the team level. We don't want that. Only specific people need access to the human resources workspace. So we're going to change that to none, and then we can manually add back who we want. So I had done this before, so it's going to jump back to what I had saved before, which is the admin should be the owner within human resources. And then since I created it, I'm an owner as well. When you update this, you can't just be sure to save. But if you wanted to add more people, you would select them. Automatically, the people from your team will appear to be selected to make it easy. But you can also type in an email and they'll pop up. Oops, I did not save. Back. And then now, within that workspace, we have our document. And within the document, you can also manage this access. So to do that, you open the document, you click that share icon, and then manage users. And so right now it is inheriting in full, but again, it's inheriting from our workspace, which we just updated to only include myself and then the admin account as owners. So that's what it will inherit. If I changed it to none, again, we would just set it up again. But we will inherit. But beyond this, you can actually add other people who are not in the workspace. So if someone else needs access to this document but shouldn't be in that workspace, you can still do that. Because this is a financial document, since it's tracking donations, we'll want to be able to add accounting to the document as an editor. Accounting is not included in the workspace, and by adding them to the document, that does not give them extra access to that workspace. It just gives them access to this document as an editor. And we also want to go ahead and just add the VP. We'll keep them as a viewer so they can then view the document but not make any changes. And again, just click confirm when you save to make sure those changes are saved and these people are added to your document. Now, missed one thing. Let me jump back in here. The other thing you can do is actually add guests to your document. So these are people who are not on your team. Each document can have 2 guests, so 2 outside users who are not part of your Grist team. And you, just like the other users, you would just add them at using their email. And then you would assign their access here. Now it will note that they are a guest. So if they're not part of your team, it'll show 1 of 2 guests. If you add another guest, it would show 2 of 2 guests. So now that we have our access set up, we'll take a look at the document that we'll be working with today. So this is a donation tracking document. Here we have donations that have been made, the amounts. We can see donee information, and then these are all donations from the selected donee. So if I select another one, this updates with all of the donations from this table, but specifically tied to this donee. We have a dashboard that just shows donations broken down by year, by the category, payment method, and then by donee. And then last, we have our donee table. Separately, we have this document planning table. So if you've been in some of our other webinars, you've seen us use a workflow to help plan out our documents. when you first set out to create a document, it can be pretty overwhelming and you're not sure where to start. Always write out a workflow. Just list out what you need in your document, and then you can build it piece by piece. And so that's what this page is here. As you see, we still have 2 more steps that need to be done, and we'll cover those today. So now that we have a general idea of the document we're working with, we'll take a look at some different features within the document that we think will be useful to you. Starting off, we'll look at our document settings. So to access document settings, click your little profile icon at the top right, and then you would go into document settings. First, you have your document ID. Now this is used for API usage. And then you can set your time zone, you can set the language, and then you can also select your local currency. One last thing on this page is the little skull and bones symbol. It's a little hidden feature, but when you click it, it will actually do a hard refresh of your document. So if I click it, it does a hard refresh. Good to go. So it won't delete anything, it just does a refresh of your document. So I'll just review that one more time. So if you just go to your profile icon, that's where document settings lives. Okay, the next one we'll talk about is the duplicate document and work on a copy feature. We did talk on these last webinar, but they are great collaboration tools. So under the share icon, you'll see duplicate document. And here it gives you the name, just includes copy, but you can rename it. And then you can choose where you want to save the duplicate. You can choose your organization, your workspace. This would be helpful. Let's say you created a document in your personal page, and then you created a team after that, and you want to move that document from your personal page to your team page. You could just create a duplicate using this method and move it that way. So you would just move it. Here I can do it backwards since it's on my team page. If I wanted to move it to my personal page, I would select personal, and then I would save. Another thing that this is actually helpful for is if you want to create a template using the document that you have built. You would just check this little button here, and it'll actually create a copy of your document without any of the data. So you'd still have all the structure, all the columns, all the formulas, but no more data. And so then you could just use that as a template or enter new data into that one. Now the other one here is work on a copy. So this is key when working on a live document, so you don't disrupt a teammate's work. So here I'm now viewing a copy, it's unsaved, and I can make changes as needed. So this URL up here is unique. So if you wanted to share your changes with somebody, you could send them the link and they'd actually be able to open it. So this is helpful if you're trying to test out some changes. Maybe you wanted to test out a new layout, but you didn't want to do that in the working copy. This is a great tool to use. When you click the share icon, you do have the option to save this copy as a separate copy within your workspace. You can return to the original if you're just done with it. You don't need to save it. You can do that. You can also replace the original. So if you were testing out changes, you like them, and you just want to replace the existing copy with your new copy, you could do that. Just keep in mind, if someone was in the other document and adding data, if you were to replace that, it would overwrite that data because that data is not in this unsaved copy. So keep that in mind. If someone's been doing stuff in the other one and you have some changes you want to implement, you could just manually do it. Or if it's just a little bit of data, you could manually re-input that data. Either way, just know that it would overwrite that. Next, we will talk about our raw data views. So raw data is the underlying data for the widgets in your document. So each of these are separate widgets. They might share the same underlying data, they might not. So here, donations and donations they do share the same underlying data. I can view that data by clicking the three-dot icon and then clicking Show Raw Data. Now, this one looks pretty similar to the page we're just looking at, but it does include all of the columns, not just the visible ones from the widget. It includes all. Here, this happens to be a column that is hidden, that we don't see. This is kind of more obvious with this little table in the bottom corner that only has 4 columns. If I show the raw data, I'm going to see that same full table again. So this is just a subset of that full data. Another way to access the raw data is actually under this link right here. You click raw data and it'll show you all the underlying data for the different widgets in your document, including here, this is the data for the summary table. So next we will talk about document history. We kind of touched on it in the questions at the beginning. To access document history, click the Tools button down here, and it opens it up on the right-hand side. So we'll start with activity. Activity shows the 100 most recent changes made in the document. So you can choose to see all 100 changes by checking the box next to all tables. Otherwise, if you don't check that, it'll just show you the changes for the currently selected table. So right now, donations is selected. If I choose to select donee instead, I'll see different changes here. Jumping over to snapshots. Snapshots are versions of your document at specific points in time. So you can open a snapshot or compare it to your current version or the version prior to the version you have selected. So when you open a snapshot, you have the option to save a copy of it. And this is all under the share icon. So we opened the snapshot here, then you click the share icon. And you have an option to save a copy. Similar to when we were working on a copy, you can save a copy. And you can also replace the current version. So this is handy if you had made changes that maybe you weren't so happy with, and you could just revert to an older version, or you could view this version, see how it was set up, and just manually make the changes in your existing version. But again, that's under document history. We have activity, and then we have snapshots. To open a snapshot, click the 3 and then open. And then to save is under the share button. So the last tool, let me go back to our current version. The last tool down here we'll talk about is access rules, which we briefly mentioned at the beginning. We said we'd come back to it. So when we added our users to the document, we were able to give them either owner, editor, or viewer access. And sometimes you need more nuance about who can see or edit individual parts of the document. And access rules will give us that power. Today, we're just going to cover the very basics, but if you want to learn more, check out our access rules webinar. And I did back in March. It goes in depth with all the different things you can do with access rules. And we'll also cover some more in-depth access rules in our January webinar. So at the beginning of the webinar, I said that editor and owners have almost the same permissions within a document by default. So it's fairly common that owners do not want editors to have the ability to change a document structure. That's the schema edit permission. This means they don't want to have the ability to add or remove columns or to change formulas, for example. So we can restrict this with the schema edit permission, which is this S button on the right. So to add a new condition, we click this plus button under default rules because we want it to apply to the entire document. And now we can enter our condition. So we can use that access that we set, owner, viewer, editor, which we see here, to restrict things. So we just want to restrict it from our editor. So we can use user.access. And then to specify that something is equal in Python syntax, it's a double equal sign. So if the access is editor for the logged in user, we want to deny the schema edit permissions. And so you just click it once and it becomes red. And we can save that. And so now an editor would not be able to add or remove columns, and they would not be able to update formulas, which can be helpful. You don't want someone to go and accidentally delete a formula they worked so hard on. If it happens, you have the history. You can always go back and see what that was. Now, we did add this at the top of the default rules section. Our rules are applied top to bottom. So this one will be granted first, which is actually just denying the schema edit permission from editor. Now, in the next one, it grants all permissions, including that schema edit. But because we already blocked it, that is the overruling one. So it'll be blocked, and then they'll be granted read, update, create, delete. This one will be ignored, and so on. So top to bottom. Now, another common need is to hide a table from a group of users. So we have this little document planning table, which is used by the document owner to think through their changes and what they want to include in the document. But this is exclusively for the owner for building the document. We can hide it from all non-owners. So back in access rules, we'll just need to add a table specific rule. And we can do that by clicking this Add Table Rules button. Then you select the table for which you want to add rules. We just want to do this for document planning. And then now we can add a condition. Now we want it so that anyone who's not an owner has no access to this. So again, we're going to use that user.access. Get out of caps. And in this case, we don't want it to be owner. So not equal to in Python syntax is exclamation point equals. So user access is not equal to owner. And if that's the case, we want to deny all. So when you click this little drop down, it gives you some cheats, but you can also click on the buttons to give permission or reject permission. So two options there. Now, again, this will block access from anyone who is not an owner for the document planning table. So I'll go ahead and save that. We take a quick look and see that in action. Under users, you can actually view as another user on your document. So we'll just look as a view or as some other user, and they don't see that document here listed. So it worked great. Let's jump back into our table, and we'll cover sort and filtering options. So to sort by a column, you can hover over the column and then click that little icon that appears. You can also right-click on the column header, and the same menu will pop up. And then you have a sort option. You can sort A to Z, Z to A. And in this case, we're going to sort our date in descending order, so Z to A. Now up here in the upper right, you do need to save your sort. And to do so, you would just click the little green icon. Just remember to do that. You do need to save. Now, if you wanted to add a second sort, you could. Again, do the same thing. Click that little arrow icon or right click, and you have the option to basically override the existing sort, or you can add to that sort. So then we could add another sort that just sorts after our date. So the only ones you really notice are when the date's the same and it changes. And so you can add a sort that way. Now, at the upper right here, we do have this little filter icon, and that allows us to filter. It will list out any sorts applied, so if you want to quickly see any sorts, click that. But then we can add a filter. So you click that little plus icon next to add filter. You can choose a column, and then you can select what years you want to include in the filter and then apply. And again, to save, you would click that green button, but you can revert just by clicking the gray button as well. So note that sorts and filters, again, not saved until you click that green check mark, but they're also only available to those with schema edit permissions. So those are the only people who can save the filters. By default, editors and owners can save sorts and filters, but since we denied that schema edit permission using access rules, specifically for editors in our document, now only owners have that ability to save sort and filter settings. So what's handy is if you block that from your users is that you can actually set up little buttons so it's easier for them to quickly apply these transient filters. So I'm going to delete my filter. To add these filter buttons, again, it's under that filter button. Click the plus next to toggle filter bar, and you see this gray button appear at the upper left. These are our filter buttons. Now we can add one. We'll add it for status. Now here, we don't want to apply any filters. We don't want to actually filter the table. So we'll save it without any filter applied. And we'll add another one for year. Same thing, no filter applied. We'll go ahead and save that. And so now these are always available to our users. No filters applied, but they could quickly see if they just wanted to see the planned ones. They could uncheck that, view it, and so on. You could also just sort by year, or sorry, filter by year. So that's what's great about these filter buttons is you can just quickly add a filter and not save it, just move on, do what you need to do. Now note that when you do save these, that does save for everyone's view. And so that's why this can be handy, is you don't save any filter, but anyone can filter as they need just without saving. So these options are also available in the Creator panel. So you can open the Creator panel by right-clicking and doing column options, or this little vertical bar in the upper right actually opens the Creator panel. We'll close out the document history. So here, under the Table tab, we have 3 more tabs: Widget, Sort, and Filter Data. Sort and Filter is where you can manage them further. So we already have Date, which allows us to sort for empty positions last, empty values last. Let me add one for Category, just to show you here. Category is what we call a choice column, which allows you to use a choice position when sorting. Let me show you what that means on a different template. With the grocery list template, we have the department as a choice column. So here we are, there's the choices. And zoom in a bit. Here I do have it set to using the choice position, which means it's sorting exactly by the way these are listed out. So you see that they are in this order. So not all of these choices are represented, but we have produce followed by non-alcoholic beverages, followed by grocery dry goods. So that does follow the order here. Now, if I were to move this to the top and save, let me refresh. Now it will show grocery dry goods at the top, and that's because we changed this choice position. And so that can be really handy, especially like here, if you're shopping through the grocery store and you go in a certain order, having the sort in that order can be helpful. Also here, you can access the different filters that are applied. So while we're here in the creator panel, we have some creator panel hot tips for you. So let's take a look here under the widget tab. So if you've ever added a new widget to the page and then forgotten to select which type of widget you'd like, so you go here, add new, add widget to page, you select your data and hit add to page, but you didn't change this option, there is an easy way to update that. You don't have to go back and delete the widget. You can come here under widget, but also the data tab. They both have options. So here under widget, you could hit change widget, change the widget type, save, it'll update it. Now you can also do this under data. Here we can again select the data selection and we can again change that widget type. But you can also update the select by. So here we can't select by anything, but it is the selector for these two widgets, the ones down here. Meaning when I select something here, these two update. And if I click into the donee card, we see that select by donations and then the donee listed. And so that's a nice, easy way to make those updates without having to go back and deleting your widget. Just use widget and data as needed. So another cool little tool here is actually zebra stripes. It's easily missed, so we just wanted to point it out under grid options. You can turn on zebra stripes for your needs. You can also control the vertical and horizontal grid lines if you'd like. Below that, we can actually add conditional row styles. Now this is fairly new. I believe we showed it in our last webinar. You just click this add conditional style. Now this will apply to the entire row. So here we'll say, if it's not the current year, we'll change it gray. Now this is going to use a hidden column. I'll show it to you here. That's just checking to see if the current year, using today's date dot year, pulling the year for today, is equal to the value in the year column, which is here. So obviously all of these that are 2022 are equal to today's year. So we're going to use this column. And if not is current year, meaning if current year is false, we can change that row style. Now you can select one of the colors from the list, but you can also use any hex code. So if I wanted to click there, it'll fill it in. But we're going to change it to a lighter gray that I saved the code for, and you can apply. And so that saves the row style, but only for those rows where this condition is met, meaning where current year is false. Now, if you wanted to add a condition, but only for a column, we can do that as well, but that would be under this column menu on the right. So here, scroll down to cell style and you'll see add conditional style. It does give you a link to open the row styles. So if you're looking for that, you can jump right over, but we'll add a conditional style. Again, this is only for the column. So we're going to use the date column, and if there's no date in a cell, we'll make it change to a different color. So in order to say that there's no date, we say not date, and we'll change it to orange. Oops. There we go. So if there's no value in the date column, as we see, we'll just change that cell style to orange. So again, that's column conditional formatting. And if you want row, you can click this link. It just brings you over to the table, and then you have your row style. Another thing we want to point out is card widgets. So here we have a card widget at the bottom. When you click into a card widget, the creator panel does update. So now we're seeing the donee card. We can hit edit card layout. And then you can actually move things around within the card. So you just drag and drop. You can also remove things from the card by clicking that X. It doesn't delete the column from the underlying data. It just hides that field from the card. And you can always click add field, add it back, or, create a new field if needed. Now, always be sure to save your changes here with cards. And if you're making a lot of changes within a card widget, save every so often. The last thing you want to do is make 20 changes and then forget to save. So just be sure to save every once in a while. Now, another thing you can do with cards and tables is quickly hide fields. So here with the card, select all, we could hide name, or if I click into a table, this is really helpful for, especially when you have a lot of columns. If you just want to view 3 columns in a new table, you could select all and let's say we'll want donee, amount, and receipt, and we want to hide everything else. Easy as that. Now, if we want to make them all visible again, we can do that too by doing this under hidden columns. Another thing you can do over here in the table menu is drag and drop these columns. So it can be a pain to drag and drop a column up here, especially if you go all the way across. Whereas over here, especially if you have tons of columns again, you can just drag it right up to the top and it'll rearrange. Easy as that. So a few notes there for you. Now the last thing we'll look at over here is actually the column type. So under column, we have column type. Now we won't cover all the different types today, but check out our webinar on understanding column types to learn more about them. Specifically, we just want to point out the reference columns and the choice columns. They sometimes can get confusing. So with reference columns, we have one here, that's the donee column. So it sets up a cross-reference to another table. You can specify the table to reference. Here we specify the donee table. And then you choose which column to show as a label. So here we're showing the name column. The options in the dropdown reflect the records that are in that referenced table. So in the donee table, here we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 records to choose from. If I jump over to the donee table, we have those same 5. Now, if I added a new reference here, and then go back to the donations table, it's now available. And it actually pulls in more information, this category that I mistyped. So we have a non-existent one. When you select a record from a reference dropdown, like you do here, it stores all of the data for that record. So here we see Natalie test, which is the name value from the name column, but it points to the entire record. And so that's how we're able to pull this category from this table. So that's a really cool thing with references. Now, we'll link the reference columns article in the chat so you can learn more about them because they are a super cool, powerful feature in Grist. Now, choice columns, you choose from one of a set of valid values. And now that's what our category column is. So you get to specify what values are available. We see them here in the choice list. And you can add more. And it will be available. So it looks very similar to a reference, but the reference is pulling from another table. The choice is pulling from this predetermined choice list. The choice list is, choice columns, choice list columns just mean you get to pick more than one from the list. They're particularly useful when you have a very specific set of responses. It's much better than letting people enter their own, because you could end up with multiple versions of the same response, and you can end up with different spellings of the same thing. So this eliminates that issue. So they have the very set specific responses, so then you can report on it better. The last thing to cover is the doc tours. I know we're kind of running out of time, so I'll be pretty quick with this, but we do have a community post on doc tours. It's always just nice to see someone else walk through it. We'll have the doc tour community post in the chat. But to do a document tour, which is helpful if you have other people coming into a document, just kind of tells them what to do. You would add a page with a new table. Now this new table has to have a very specific name: Grist doc tour, G, D, and T being capitalized with no space. And so now we have our table. Now this table needs 5 columns. And the column headers are title, body, placement, location, and location cell. So title, very obvious, it's just going to be the title at the top of the little pop-up. The body is the rest of the text in the pop-up. Placement, where on the screen do you want it to appear? Location, where in the document do you want it to appear? And then location cell is the very specific portion in the document that you want it to apply to. So location is actually a formula column. To do a formula, you hit the equals button on a keyboard, and then it turns into a formula cell. And we're going to do self hyperlink, which, oops, there we go, which just creates a link to the document, like the main link that you would access the document. It doesn't go anywhere specific in the document, just your home page for the document. And we're going to add to that the location cell that we'll specify. Now, because I don't have a location cell, it's going to give me an error, but we'll update that in a second. So first, title, body, we'll make this easy. We just want like an entry or welcome to the document. This is what it is. So we have a title, donation tracking, a body explaining what it's for, placement. We won't actually put anything here because we just want it in the center of the screen. And then we want to include our location cell. So where do we want this to appear? I'm going to open another page. The Grist doc tour automatically is hidden. So if you're working on a tour, have that open in one screen and have your document open in another screen where you can click around. Otherwise, you have to type basically at the end of your URL, you would just type Grist doc tour to pull it back up. But here we just want it on this front page, the donations page, which is here, page 6. So for the location cell, you would take this entire URL and then delete everything before the \p, \page. We'll make it easy. We'll just copy that last bit and paste it there. So now we have our first bit. So when I click on it, we have our title, we have our body. It's on page 6. We didn't tell it where to go, so it's right in the middle. Now, likely you'll want to reference a very specific cell when you're guiding people through the document. So jump back over here. If I want to point someone specifically to show them to pick a donee, I can click into a cell and right click. And we can point it to this very specific cell by using this anchor link. So you copy anchor link. Again, that's right click, or at the header, you can do that as well, but it won't take you to that specific cell. So right click, copy anchor link, and then we will paste that anchor link in the location. And again, we delete everything before the P, \P. And that's telling it exactly where to be on the page, what it's pointing at. And then we'll add some text. So now we jump back, we can do our tour again. We have page 1, 2, and now it's pointing to that specific cell. Again, we'll show that again. If I wanted to point them to the receipt, we can right click the receipt field, copy anchor link, jump back here. To paste, it's Control V, V as in Victor. Again, delete everything before the \P. Jump back. And then now it's got another one pointing to a specific record. So we're going to do that, right click, copy anchor link. So another thing you can do with your doc tours is tell it where you want it to be. So like if I wanted to point out this cell right here, and I wanted to show this side, if I copy that, I can move it around the screen. So if it's blocking something you want to see, you can move it around. So right now, if I wanted to point out something about this card and this card, well, we can't really see this one. So if I can move this to the top. So let's jump back. You can specify placement. So top, bottom, left, right. Oops. Let me copy my text. And now it's at the top. So it's very easy to kind of just move it around as needed, left, right, top, bottom. So you see what you need to see. Again, right clicking to get that anchor link. So that's how you do the doc tour. Let me show you that again, just cell hyperlink, flush the location cell. And then the last thing I wanted to show you is if you have a table like document planning that you don't need to see, but you don't want to delete, use these 3 buttons, hit remove. Now you'll have this pop-up. You don't want to delete the data. We want to save it. So keep the data, delete the page, and it will live in raw data. We'll hit delete, and we click into raw data. That document planning is still there, and I can still click into it and see it. And I could add it again. And then you also have access to your Grist doc tour here. So if you ever want to make updates. The last thing I wanted to show you is how to access that in the URL. I can spell it correctly. You just go Grist doc tour after the page. So instead of doing a page number, and it'll take you right to it. So I know we covered a lot. Please put any questions in the chat and we can answer them for you. But thanks so much for joining today. I hope you guys learned a lot. I know we covered quite a bit of like everything. And I hope the doc tour helps you guys as well. Because I mean, we love them. If you ever want to take a look at example ones, our template gallery is full of them. And then again, we have that community post that has all the steps. I know it's hard to remember. I have a little cheat sheet that I keep on my desktop on what to include for Grist doc tour. But it does just, it's helpful for guiding people to show them how your document actually works. Only the elements owned by a user. Like, let me see, like if I'll use the sales team. So if Chris owned these deals you would want to only filter by Chris, you could do that here by filtering by Chris, but you can also do it using access rules. It is much more in depth than what we covered today, but Anaise's webinar on access rules does cover how to do that. Like if you just wanted Chris to only see his specific fields, they would have to be noted in that row. So like here, Chris is in that row, and so we can assign by that. Okay, yeah. Then I would recommend access rules if they shouldn't see anybody else's. Let me find that link.
Natalie, do you want to, right here in this template that you're looking at, go into access rules and view as Marianne, just to show that filtering? This has yeah.
Oh, perfect. Okay. Let me show as Marianne. Here we go. So now Marianne only sees her deals here. Let me see if I can point out that access rule. So here it's who on the sales team based on an email, and then we can limit what they see using this information. So definitely check out the access rules webinar because that will walk you through it. It's super helpful. Any other questions?
Okay, if there's no more questions, I guess we can wrap this one up and see each other again next month.
Great. Thanks for joining, everyone. And to those in the US, happy Thanksgiving. We'll see you next month for our December webinar, which will be part 3 in the Grist for Teams series.
Thank you, Natalie.